Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tony Flock with Creative Leadership Solutions, and Doug Reeves and I will get the webinar started in just about 1 minute. Looking forward to our afternoon together, and we appreciate you joining us. Shall we, sir?
I've got it still about one more minute, a minute and a half on my computer.
Sounds good. All right, well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today as we discuss and learn from Dr. Douglas Reeves those things that no matter what we need to address for the upcoming school year. So we're going to jump right in today after a few announcements. Couple of things as we begin, just so you're aware, all participants are muted due to the audience size. However, we certainly welcome your questions, comments, and insights throughout the webinar, so please do not hesitate to use the question or chat feature to interact with us. And already see some greetings from Argentina today and a request about a recording. And yes, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for download. It typically takes about 36 hours for this to be posted to our website once done processing. If you should lose audio throughout the presentation, you'll notice at the bottom of most slides will be a dial-in number with an access code. So with that in mind, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Douglas Reeves, founder of Creative Leadership Solutions. He's the author of more than 40 books and 100 articles on education, leadership, and student achievement. Doug and we at the Creative Leadership team are providing free webinars for teachers, leaders, parents, and students around the world. Doug.
Well, hello, everybody. It's so nice to have you back with us. I promise we'll have, as always, the latest and best evidence. And I also really welcome your interactions. So make sure that you use the chat function or the question function, and we'll make sure that we honor those questions and challenges. It's also okay to represent the people who are not in the room. Think of colleagues, think of students, think of parents and community members who may not be in this webinar, but still have important contributions to make. And when I say challenges, I really mean that. I welcome divergent thinking. I'm not saying that I've got all the answers, and I know that I learn from your challenges as well. I want to make sure that if you want to ask personal questions, you can go directly to me on the opening slide. And by the way, you can download on the download function on your webinar all the handouts from today. You're free to copy and reproduce them as you wish. You can also get the live webinar itself, the recording of video and audio available to you just as soon as that's ready. And contact me directly. I'm happy to respond to questions for you or for colleagues in your particular system. So let's get underway and talk about some of the issues that are most important to you. I want to make sure that we're offering services not only to broad groups, but to individuals. My colleague, Dr. David Gleason, internationally known adolescent psychologist, is providing free grief support groups. If the virus has struck your school, we have clients who have had several family members, parents, grandparents, staff members who have fallen ill, many, alas, who have died. Grief support groups are available at no cost. Just let us know at service@creativeleadership.net. Some of you prefer to get your ideas in writing, and Writing and Reflection is available at marshwriters.org. We meet the first Saturday of every month. That'll come up this coming Saturday. And of course, a leadership support, go straight to me, Douglas.Reeves at creativeleadership.net, and you'll be able to get personal and direct support from me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to start off today by getting to know you in the audience, and I apologize, we have a few who are joining us internationally. So those of you that are international, if you'll send your responses in via either the chat or the question feature, we'll add those to our data. But for those that are domestic, if you would please take out your cell phone and begin to compose a text. Send a text to recipient 22333. Type the message Creative Lead 764. So again, compose the message as you see on the screen there to recipient 22333 and send the message Creative Lead 764. Once you hit send, you should receive a reply indicating that you have joined our poll. So we'll give you just about another 20 seconds to do that, and we will introduce our first question for you. And this will be a getting to know you question. We'd like to know who is joining us today by roll. So here we go, ladies and gentlemen. If you are a classroom educator, if you would please send A to in that text message chain. If you're an instructional coach, B, a counselor, C, a building administrator, D, a district administrator, E, and county, regional, provincial, or state administrator, F. And Doug, looks like responses are rolling in. And two more, several onlines, mostly building administrators, one classroom educator online with us today. Another classroom educator, building administrator, campus. Okay, looks like we've got most of the responses coming in by question.
Well, this is really helpful, and I'm especially grateful to have such a diverse group of professional backgrounds, and all of your insights, of whatever your perspective, are really valuable to contribute to this discussion today. So please do keep questions, comments, and challenges coming in on the chat and question function.
And ladies and gentlemen, we'd also like to get your sense, given your role and what you're hearing from your states or provincial departments or from your administration, which of these three scenarios do you think is most likely to happen? That schools and offices will be open for the beginning of the year, some social distancing and split shifts may occur, or C, a fall pass and schools will remain closed through December 31st. And a couple other responses, Doug, coming in question. Fallen most heavily in B.
Take about 10 more seconds.
Yeah, still trending towards B in the questions, folks. Thank you for sending those in. We appreciate it.
And it's interesting, just today, I've had conversation with districts around the country that are in all three areas. Some are completely open for business, and students are starting live, both summer camps and summer schools. Others are blended, others remain completely closed. Sometimes the offices are open, so the adults are going to their offices and schools, but the schools themselves remain closed. So we'll see how this shakes out, but as this seminar promised, no matter what, we're going to be ready for you. So let's talk about the core competencies for equity and excellence. In the research that I've done, most recently published in the book Equity and Excellence, published in 2020, we focus on 5 core competencies, and those include number 1, focus. That's not only focus in the classroom, and we're going to talk about power standards later on. Both our friends in the United States and abroad, wherever I hear it, national standards, state, provincial standards, local, there's too many of them. We've already lost 3 months of instruction. We know that there's going to be assessments coming up in the spring of 2021. We can't possibly cover a full year's of standards in the next 7 months. And let's face it, some of your students need more than a year. So we're going to talk about how do we focus in the classroom. We also need to focus at the building level. In the United States, a lot of CARES funds are coming in, and the unfortunate tendency is people are going to be playing whack-a-mole with here's a program, there's a program, there's a program, and they'll keep doing it until the money runs out. Friends, that is deeply unwise. If I've learned anything in my research, it is practices, not programs, that really improve student achievement. So focus on a few things, 6 or fewer. Number 2, instructional effectiveness. I'm really a big fan of Kim Marshall's work, and these are free. You can get rubrics that have a page on lesson planning, a page on classroom management, a page on feedback and assessment. They really are highly focused, and best of all, they give teachers not only fair and consistent feedback, but they save coaches and administrators time by simply highlighting what you see, don't highlight what you don't see. And what about leadership effectiveness? We've provided the free leadership performance matrix that will allow you, from your new aspiring leaders all the way to veteran leaders, to let them proceed on 10 dimensions of leadership to get better and better all the time. You don't have to spend a lot of money on a fancy assessment program. These things are strongly research-based and are free. Effective feedback, and we'll talk about the elements of feedback later on today. As John Hattie says, feedback, one of the most powerful tools in the teacher's toolbox. And of course, efficacy. And let's get really clear, because a lot of people talk about efficacy, but I want to get very practical about that. You want to know what efficacy is, friends? It is not asking people, are you feeling efficacious today? It's asking this question: what causes student achievement? Just let that hang in the air. What causes student achievement? And once you ask that, then they're able to identify some causes that are things we can't control, things we can influence, and things we can control and influence. It's those 3 piles that all the answers to what causes student achievement will be in. And once you have those answers, you'll be able to say there's a lot more things that we influence and control than things that we cannot influence or control. That's efficacy. Let's take a look at focused teaching and leadership. The key to focused teaching is power standards. And that means a subset of the standards you have. And I realize that a lot of people say, but Doug, I've got to cover everything. No, you don't. There is a dramatic difference between frantic delivery of content and actual student learning. And so what I'm suggesting is identify that subset that meets these 3 criteria. What has leverage? For example, if I push on the lever of this standard, it elevates many other areas of student learning. For example, one lever is nonfiction writing. The evidence from my research, from Stephen Graham and many others, is clear. When I have more nonfiction writing, K through 12, it helps me also in reading comprehension, in science, in math, in social studies. Nonfiction writing, clearly a power standard. Tables, charts, and graphs, we see that in math, but also in science and social studies. And in my dream world, every time I write an informative essay, I'm going to illustrate that with a table, chart, or graph, even in ELA. So what has leverage? Number 2, what has endurance? The mistake we often make is I only look at my grade's standards. Please don't do that. If I'm teaching 4th grade, please also look at 6th grade, 8th grade, 10th grade. You'll see the same thing like argumentative writing come up again and again and again. And finally, essentiality. What's really necessary for the next grade? I'm asking every 5th grade teacher I know to buy some virtual pizza, the price is right, for 6th grade teachers, and ask them, hey, over this virtual pizza, what do I need to do for my students this year that will let them go to your class next year with confidence and success? And you want to know what that 6th grade teacher will never ever say, well, Doug, you better cover everything, because after all the standards are equally important. They never say that. They give you a list that is brief and focused. 8th grade colleagues, please buy some virtual pizza for a 9th grade teacher and ask them, what's most important for me to send students to you with confidence and success? And they never say cover 40, 50, 60 things. They give you a list that is brief and focused. And sometimes they'll even give you some things that aren't even on those state or provincial standards, because they'll talk about things like organizing an assignment notebook, asking for help when you need it, and all manner of behavioral components that you don't see in typical sets of standards. So power standards have got leverage, endurance, and essentiality. And to my leaders on this call, I'm begging you to consider the law of initiative fatigue. My research in more than 2,000 schools says as following: you get more than about 6 initiatives, you might as well have none. You can't focus on more than that. And the impact insight process that we use to help schools and systems do this is a very simple 3-step process. We simply, number 1, say, Let's take an initiative inventory. And every time you do that, it's longer than you think it is. What's the inventory? Secondly, what's the range of implementation from the boxes got delivered to maybe, well, they got delivered and teachers got trained, to delivery and training and evidence of implementation, all the way to got delivered, got trained, evidence of implementation, and evidence of impact on student learning. So 4 clearly different levels of implementation. And friends, what I see all over the place is level 1. Things got delivered, but they really were never even used. In fact, sometimes people don't even ask the question if things were used. All they know is they got delivered. You want to save money as we're in a tight financial situation. The easiest cuts you'll ever make is stopping spending money on things that nobody is using. And I promise you, you've got some of those. Next slide. So let's talk about feedback. As I said earlier, one of the most powerful tools in your toolbox, provided that, not just any old feedback, that it's fast feedback, fair, accurate, specific, and timely. And this applies, of course, to grading, but also to all manner of feedback, day-to-day classroom feedback. Fairness is all about consistency. For example, when we play a game, whether it's on the playground or an away game in interscholastic sports, we expect the rules of the game to be consistent. Imagine for a minute that when we're, God willing, we have students participating in interscholastic sports again, every away game, the shape of the ball was different. The dimensions of the field were different. The rules of the game enforced by officials were different. Your students would quickly say, wait a minute, that's not fair, because they know that fairness is about consistency. And it's just the same when they've got 7 class periods with 7 different grading policies. And when the rules of the game, whether it's discipline, grading, or anything else, vary from one day to the next, from one class period to the next. And let's remember, what do students do on the playground, on the other fields of play? If they think a game is unfair, they stop playing the game. So number 1, it's got to be fair. Number 2, it's got to be accurate. I'm assessing what I think I'm assessing. And I can tell you as a math teacher, sometimes I was assessing math, but sometimes I was assessing English language literacy with numbers in it. And if I can't tell the difference between assessing math and assessing literacy, the students don't know what that feedback means. Accurate feedback is highly focused. In the last 3 months, what were you assessing? Were you really assessing student proficiency, or were you assessing access to technology and parental support? Accuracy means I assess what I think I'm assessing. The S stands for specific. Think here like a music teacher, like an athletic coach. They don't send you information weeks later on the notes that you missed or the balls that you dropped. They give specific and immediate feedback. And in a 10 or 15-minute observation, you'll hear with your own ears the impact of that music teacher's feedback on student performance. The goal of feedback is not merely awarding a mark. The goal of the feedback is improving teaching and learning. And that's what specific feedback does. And of course, it's got to be timely as well. I got to get the feedback in time to use it. When it's weeks later, I really grieve about that. And one of the big complaints I've heard in the last several months about COVID-19, when students are working from home, I can see the stamps in your email. You're up at 10 o'clock on Sunday night grading papers that you don't even know who actually wrote them. And by the time the feedback gets to students, they're not paying any attention. Last week was a different geological era. The best, most timely feedback is real time, right in class, immediately provided. So let's think about planning now for differentiation. Before the end of this year, and I know for some of you, the year is already over, certainly as we start the 2021 school year, let's make sure first day we get a reading level on every student. Doesn't have to be fancy, doesn't have to be computerized. Just have a reading sample and ask some fundamental questions. Who was the character? What happened next? What do you think is going to happen next? If it was informative, what was the claim? What were the arguments supporting the claim? Very simple questions to see if they can read the text in front of them. And if they can't read grade level text, that's really important information for you to have first day. A 20-minute writing assessment. Maybe you can combine the two, that the writing assessment is in response to the text. In a 20-minute math assessment, just 12 items on number operations. Notice how simple these are. They're not things that are going to take hours. They're not things that are going to be generated by some fancy 30 or 40 item test. You create them. I really believe in teacher ownership of these things. I got a lovely note from Dylan Willem today, and he made a profoundly important statement that said, many of you know Dylan, he's very famous for his work on Inside the Black Box and the value of formative assessment. He has a new article coming out, as do I, in the September Ed Leadership. And Dylan just said, the value of a teacher-made assessment that teachers can use and immediately implement the results of is better than tons of the illusion of sophistication of assessments that vendors sell you. So yeah, I know that we have fancy assessments outside, but please don't underestimate the value of teacher assessment. So get those reading levels, writing levels, math levels right off the bat. Let's make sure that we have resources. And I know we're all falling over each other trying to provide technology resources, but friends, let's think about this. A lot of technology was distributed in the last 3 months that students didn't use. They might have had the computer, but they didn't have the bandwidth. Or maybe they had the computer and the bandwidth, but 3 other siblings and parents were fighting over the same bandwidth. Or they had the computers and the bandwidth, but they didn't know how to use them. It's not enough to deliver. We got to make sure that we have real access, which means real interaction and ownership. Moreover, please don't devalue old-fashioned telephones, old-fashioned books. We need our librarians, our media center leaders, our community libraries to sanitize those books, put them in sanitized book bags this summer, and get them in the hands of children. They're not going to read to themselves, those books, so we got to get them into the hands of students who will use them at every single grade level. And of course, let's remember pre-assessment. Before we launch into a lesson, I've got to make sure my students are ready for the lesson. Because let's face it, in the spring of 2020, there's no such thing as a 6th grade class anymore. There's a bunch of 11 and 12-year-olds in there at 4 different reading levels. And I better figure out where they are before I launch into my lesson. Now, what about lessons from special ed? God bless special educators. And I just want to speak to you teacher to teacher, because I've learned so much as a teacher myself from special education. In fact, what I've generally said is what they call special ed, I would call good ed. Let me illustrate with some examples just from the last couple of months. Typically at the end of the year, from little kids all the way through secondary kids, there's the end of year project, the end of year paper, the end of year demonstration. It's a big honking project that I called a project, and my special educator said, wait a minute, Doug, that's not one thing. That's 10 or 15 things. And you got to break it into its component parts and provide day-to-day feedback on that. That is so wise, because it not only teaches students that they don't have to climb Mount Everest, but they take one step at a time, but is also teaching them the essentials of project management and time management. Not just one giant project, but breaking it down step by step. Please don't think that's just a special education idea. That, as well as adaptations and accommodations, are things that all of us can do. Next. So what about professional learning? Friends, I want you to think about our new colleagues joining our profession. Look, we need 2-on-1 defense here. If you've got new colleagues joining our profession in the fall of 2020 and they missed that spring 2020 field experience, then they're starting at 0. And so here's what 2-on-1 defense looks like. That means I have one colleague, not an administrator at the end of the month or at the end of 3 months. Every day, one senior colleague helping me on curriculum and assessment. We all know what it's like to be one day behind or ahead of our students. And another senior colleague helping me on classroom management and parent communication. Hey, a parent just cussed me out. A kid just cussed me out. A kid's out of control. What do I do? And the answer can't be reflexing them, sending them to the office. I have to learn classroom management by watching a master at work. So we need to help those teachers day by day with daily outbriefs on curriculum, assessment, classroom management, and parent communication, because they didn't get it last spring. And they need our help or we will lose them from our profession. Administrators, I'm going to ask you to let those teachers observe a master teacher at work. And the only way that's going to happen is if you show that you've still got your chops and take over that classroom for 30 or 45 minutes so our new teachers can observe what does a great teacher look like in terms of engagement, in terms of management, in terms of effective hooks for instruction, and so on. That's something that you observe not in a workshop, but by watching our best teachers at work. We have to think about incremental feedback. And I'll tell you what, the Marshall Memo mini rubrics, mini observation rubrics are the best in class on that. And we also need to observe student work. One of the best things we can do in our professional learning communities is letting every teacher, but particularly our newest colleagues, observe a piece of student work and ask the fundamental question, do we agree on what's proficient or not? Whether it's writing, mathematics problem solving, a science lab report, do we agree on what's proficient? Because if we cannot agree as college educated adults, there is no bloomin' way that a fourth grader, a sixth grader, a 12th grader is going to understand it unless we are super clear about what the word proficiency means. And finally, a great idea I learned from teachers, data without tears. I know many of you use data displays, and I respect that and appreciate it. But the data represent flesh and blood human beings. And what these teachers did was to have a big label on top of their data wall that said, data has a face. And they put literal pictures of every single student on the left-hand column. So you just didn't look at raw data, but we reminded ourselves that behind the numbers was a real human being. So let's think about essential changes in grading. I'm not going to ask for big changes. You don't have to rewrite grading policies. These are little things that'll get you big results. So number one, you don't have to use standards-based grading language if your district is comfortable with A, B, C, D, F grading. I'm not trying to change that. I'm just trying to say you can keep A, B, C, D, F grading if you make it fair and accurate. That's all I'm trying to do. And you can have the same scale that people are comfortable with, but make it fair and accurate. What we have to do are these two tweaks. Get rid of the average. If we've learned anything of value in the last 3 months, it's that you can't average those missing assignments of March and April into the ending grade at the end of the semester. What we have to do is to look at the latest and best evidence. That was good practice during COVID-19 shutdown. It's going to be good practice for the next 20 years. Latest and best evidence, not the average. The average is fundamentally an inaccurate way to evaluate student achievement. And the way I get this across is to ask this question. If LeBron moved to your town, and my goodness, I wish he'd moved to Boston, we need him. But if LeBron moved to your town, the average income of your town would go up. But every fourth and fifth grader in your school knows that LeBron's moving to the town would make the average an inaccurate estimate of income in your town. In other words, one data point can distort that, just like one low score can distort a student's performance in grading. So get rid of the average, use latest and best evidence, and get rid of the 100-point scale. That's an anachronism of the early 20th century. And everybody on here can tell me the difference between an A and a B and a C and a D, but you flat can't tell me the difference between an 84 and an 83. That is a distinction without a difference. And especially, you can't tell me the difference between a 90 that's an A and the 89 that's a B. Again, a distinction without a difference. So let's stay in the name of accuracy to the big picture of A, B, C, D, and F, and make those analogous to A is a 4, B is a 3, C is a 2, D is a 1, F is a 0. You don't need the 100-point scale. We've only had it for 1 century out of 4 centuries of public education. For the most part, we have not had a 100-point scale. It's not the way we've always done it, and you can get rid of that as an inaccurate scale. Finally, let's rethink our honor system. Do what Harvard does. I know Harvard's not the best at everything, but one thing they kind of get right is highest honors, high honors, and honors. And that is, you can discern as a faculty, highest honors, let's say for the sake of argument, is 3.9 and higher with integrity and service. If all you do is make a 4.0, but you don't have integrity and service, you're not highest honors. You want to say that high honors is 3.7 and 3.8 with integrity and service, you make the call. If you want to say honors is 3.5 and 3.6 with integrity and service, that's your judgment. But what you're not going to do is say 3.99995 is different from 3.99994. That's the silly distinction that happens every year, and it is inaccurate and wrong and inequitable. What it's really saying is who didn't have to work during the summertime so they could take an extra college course to goose their GPA. That's wrong. So use the Latin honor system of highest honors, high honors, and honors. It'll be a lot more accurate and fair for everybody. Next slide.
And Doug, as we transition into our next poll, a couple of comments have rolled in. One comment regarding real access, even the value of the good old telephone.
Thank you for mentioning that. People have asked me, what are the lessons out of COVID-19? The value of personal contact. Technology, and no matter how fancy your platform is, whether it's Zoom or GoToMeeting or anything else, is not a substitute for that one-to-one call. And I'll tell you the most heartrending story I've heard in the last few months were students on the telephone holding a picture of their teacher in their hand as they talk to them. I miss you. I love you. It'll make you weep when you think about the value of that one-to-one communication by teachers and students.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, please keep comments and questions rolling in. Meanwhile, we're going to ask you another question. So if you have joined, just pick up your phone, and as soon as you see the question appear, you may send your response. If you have not yet joined the poll, please pick up your phone and send a text to recipient 22333. Type the message creative lead 764. And again, for our friends and colleagues joining internationally, if you'll send your responses in by chat or through the question feature. We would like to know, ladies and gentlemen, based on the 7 practices Doug just described, which of the 7 do you think you're most likely to implement going into 2020, 2021?
And Tony, are they allowed to say
you may select more than one response, yes. You may send as many responses as you'd like. We are getting differentiation rolling in on the question feature. That's our trend on the question feature so far, differentiation, but also the core competencies, prioritizing professional learning, feedback and professional learning, grading and the core competencies, effective feedback. And a question, Doug, as these continue to roll in from Anne, might the Latin honor system have the unintended consequence of increasing competition between students, resulting in more strained relationships among students?
And thank you for letting me clarify that. It's actually the exact opposite. In the Latin honor system, I have an incentive to collaborate and to support my fellow students because both of us can get highest honors as long as we meet the criteria of integrity, service, and 3.9 or higher. What the old system does is to say, don't collaborate, because if a 3.99995 is different from a 3.99994, I'm never going to help you if you're within 1/1000th of one decimal point of me, because there's always winners and losers in that system. The Latin honor system encourages collaboration, which is exactly what students need in the world of work and in college.
And one last question, Doug, as we transition into lessons from the shutdown from Maritha. Effective feedback and coaching. Her question is, what do they have in common?
Yeah, I think the issue comes down to personal relationships. That feedback and coaching, we know is important for students, but I meant in the context of adult to adult. Our newest teachers need that. Frankly, our 35-year veterans need that. And that is, it's too easy in a time of very high stress for professional learning community discussions to go way off the rails. So part of what Tony and I and our colleagues do is to sit in those teacher teams, administrative teams, and keep us focused on what the most important thing is. If we have central office leaders, I just published an article on supercharged cabinet meetings. How do we keep everything from a cabinet meeting to a board meeting to a teacher collaborative team meeting focused on the positive stuff? Because it's too easy for them to go way off the rails in terms of everything that we fear that's going wrong. So let's talk a little bit about lessons from the shutdown. One big lesson I've learned is not to fill in the silence with our worst fears. I've had a dialogue with a lot of teachers who ask me, Doug, our number one concern is disengagement. The kids just aren't checking in, they're not collaborating. And I'll say, well, why is that? Well, they're just lazy. They're just not logging. You know, that may be true. They're in the research community, we have a technical term for teenagers who are lazy and disengaged. We call it normal. And let me tell you, if this were 2019, we wouldn't end the conversation with they're lazy and normal. We'd say, okay, so what do we do to hook them? What do we do to get them engaged? And if they were really not showing up at school, we'd be calling home. We'd be getting counselors, social workers, home visits, whatever we needed to do to get them on the premises. So I'm asking, please don't fill in their silence with our worst fears. Yeah, maybe it's lazy, but maybe they're taking care of siblings. Maybe they're taking care of children. Maybe they're doing day labor to put bread on the table because mom and dad got laid off. Please don't fill in silence with our worst fears. Let's dig into the causes behind that silence, just as we would have in 2019 and we will in the future. Personal relationships with teachers and students, important now more than ever. And by the way, I don't want to put this exclusively on the back of teachers. I have heard some amazing examples of paraprofessionals, security people, bus drivers, anybody cashing a paycheck on the telephone every single day to maintain personal relationships with parents and students. So if people aren't doing their regular job and they've got some time and they're cashing a paycheck, we need to encourage them to be part of the solution of personal relationships. And of course, another lesson I've learned is very short assessments. Bag those 30 and 40 item assessments. Teachers are really angry because they don't know who did them and it's taking huge amounts of their time. Do 2 or 3 items, do them in class with clear checks for understanding. Now, a great lesson that I've learned is on student leadership. And this carries not only for COVID-19 in the past 3 months, but on into the future. And by the way, here is where our fine arts teachers really shine. I fear that a lot of them have been left out because they're thinking, well, my gosh, we've lost so much class time. All that matters now is literacy and math. Wait a minute. Part of the emotional and psychological needs of our children is for them to know that they are not helpless victims, that they are part of the solution. And so I want to say to these young people, we need you, your school needs you, your country needs you. And here's some ways that I've seen students around the country help. For example, I've seen poetry slams. I'm going to say some issues about Mr. Floyd in a moment, the African-American student, African-American man who was killed just a little more than a week ago that we need to keep in our thoughts. And I'll say more about that in a moment. But I want to give students a way to express their heartfelt feelings about that, and poetry slams are a great way to do that. Music, either their compositions or music from the past, a great way to express themselves and to share with their community. I've seen art displays, literally creating their own museum in a school and in a district. I've seen them take the opportunity to empower younger students by story time and reading, including in different languages. You know, we used to have teach-ins and protests of previous generations. What a great opportunity to channel protest into teach-ins, to give our young colleagues empowerment through literacy, and checking in on elders to let them know that we value them as well. And I'll bet if we put our students together, they'd have 100 other ideas. The whole point is, part of their emotional and mental health is not to have them feel like helpless victims, not to have them feel that there's nothing that they can do, but to have them feel genuinely empowered. Next slide. I think we can do homework menus. More real practice needs to be done in class and less stuff done at home. But to the extent that parents demand it, let them do things like this. Double and triple a recipe or have a recipe with helping in meal preparation. Let them interview families and elders to create a family history. That's the nonfiction writing we talked about earlier. Have them create a neighborhood newspaper. Now more than ever do we need to know what's happening on the ground, block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood. Engage in read alouds. Don't just have them retreat to their room and fill in a reading log, which may or may not represent reading that happened. Have them read aloud with expression, with characters. That's the kind of thing that homework can really be, not the odd numbered problems 1 through 30. One thing that teachers have done marvelously well in the last few months is on-call academic content, just very short 3 to 5 minute presentations. And this will help us even when we're back in class. Not 30-minute lectures, but one concept for 3 to 5 minutes that students can review, play, and replay at their own pace. Next slide. Meaningful checks for understanding. Look, here is something that we can really help our new colleagues on. Only rookies say, everybody with me? Or anybody got any questions? Those are rookie mistakes. And that creates the illusion of engagement that is not true. What we need to ask instead is meaningful checks for understanding, because teachers are really frustrated with copying and cheating. Here's the answer. A meaningful check for understanding sounds like this. Next slide. Hey, Jerome, you did a great job on citing citations for that paper, and I really appreciate that, but I'd like you to explain why you chose those sources and why you rejected other sources that you might have chosen. Let me tell you what, if Jerome copied that paper, he'll never be able to answer that question. And the way we make this work is, even if I've got 30 students, I do what my elementary colleagues do, equity sticks. And I pull a name out of the bowl, so everybody has an equal probability of being called on. Now, I can't do this with 30 kids, but I can do it with 5. And if they all have an equal probability of being called on, I'm not waiting for Jerome to volunteer. I'm randomly calling on people. And let me tell you what, kids don't like it because it makes them work harder. They can't check out. They can't just pretend to be engaged and know that somebody else will raise their hand. My rule is you raise the hand to ask a question, not to answer a question. So I'm going to say, Christina, hey, you got the right answer on that geometry proof, or I could have said science test or whatever it was. But Christina, I don't know how you got from step 2 to step 3. Would you please explain that to me? If Christina copied those 5 steps, she'll never be able to do that. Now, I'm not trying to embarrass or humiliate anybody, but I am trying to have a meaningful check for understanding. And that never happens when I say, anybody got any questions? Or everybody with me? It's a meaningful check that I can do so on a random basis. So wellness checks, another lesson that we can learn from our primary students. You know, you walk into a primary class, they do circles every morning. Kids know each other's name. They know something about their friends from outside of school. Why do we stop doing that in adolescence and pre-adolescence? The upper elementary grades and the middle and high school grades, you hardly ever see that wellness check. Wait a minute. Is that because pre-adolescents and adolescents don't care about identity, don't care about things outside of school? If we will invest, as our primary colleagues do, 5 or 10 minutes on wellness checks to start the day, the rest of that period is going to go much better. And when we're gathered as adults, I know many of you use professional learning communities, and I honor that. I've co-written books and articles with Rick Dufour and Becky Dufour, and I honor that legacy. But I'm asking you, in addition to the questions that we all ask, what do we want students to learn? How do we know if they've learned it? What do we do if they don't? What do we do if they have? That's the 4 questions. Please ask question 0. What do students need in order to support learning this week? What do they need emotionally? What do they need in terms of nutrition, medical care, housing, other support? If we'll ask question 0, we'll get a lot better traction on questions 1 through 4. Next slide. Let's think about what you're doing great in time and project management. I've learned so much from my colleagues who have end of year, and I mentioned special ed before, but break those things down. Don't give a project assignment, but think of it as a task. And how you define a task is basically the number of minutes it takes. For younger kids, it might take 5 or 10 minutes. For older kids, maybe 15 or 30, but it's never more than that. When we get into these multi-hour tasks, please don't assign that. Break it down so we teach them the building blocks of time management and project management, and then give them feedback task by task so that they learn to assemble that jigsaw puzzle of every project. Next slide. My best idea of the year, egg timer. I learned this from a science teacher. This was a really smart guy who got awards for his entertaining lectures. He could go on for 30, 40, 60 minutes, and people laughed and they applauded, except kids weren't learning science. So we started this egg timer idea, which is 3 minutes to present one concept. Ding, egg timer goes off. 3 minutes either in small group or individual. I trust your judgment as to which is better for your students. 3 minutes, ding. 3 minutes, whole class review. And then I'm going to call on students randomly to make sure I check for understanding just on this one concept. Very, very fast paced. In a 45-minute class period, I can do 5 concepts with 3 minutes concept, ding, 3 minutes breakout, ding, 3 minutes whole class, ding. And it goes by like lightning. and I have meaningful checks for understanding the whole way. It's one of the best practices I've seen, and it disciplines me because, as you've seen, I can go on and on and on with concepts without taking a breath. If I were teaching students, I'd force myself to stop with that egg timer and check for understanding on a regular basis. Next slide.
Sorry for the delays, Doug. It appears my bandwidth is dropping off drastically. Next one is first week of school. Should be loading
Okay,
momentarily.
no problem. So I want to start with reading, writing, and math level. As I said earlier, you can get those really fast. Question 0 for PLCs. And of course, please make sure in that first week, as soon as we open, whether we're blended, whether we're closed, whether we're open, first week, I know who was a chronic absentee last year, whether it was 2019 or whether it was during the shutdown. I know who was chronically disengaged. I need to have a family meeting, either in person, ideally, maybe on the sidewalk, hopefully in person, to say, how do we make that better this year? Because we really need you to be in school and need you to be engaged. We know who the behavioral problems last year. Don't wait for a suspension or a problem to bring parents in. First week of school, either virtually, on the sidewalk, in person. Hey, last year, I know that sometimes you lost your temper, and I want you to know that when things get stressful and boiled over, we can help you. We've got counseling resources. We've got places that you can go. Here's how you can ask for help. Even give me a signal when you feel like you're about ready to blow, so we decompress before things get out of control, because we really need you to be a positive force in our classroom this year and not lose your temper. So let's figure out ways that we can collaborate together. Have those positive discussions first week of school. Next slide.
And again, it looks like I'm losing connectivity. Intensive in-class support is where this one picks up.
That's okay. I'm just going to, and also let's take a look at any questions that we've had come in on the question or chat function as well. Remember, for our new teachers, they need support every day, not at the end of a month, certainly not at the end of an evaluation period. Frankly, most official state evaluation programs don't pass the FAST test. They're not fair, accurate, specific, and they're sure in the world not timely. Teachers, especially new people joining our profession, need support every single day. And it's got to be safe to ask questions. Here's what goes through their mind, and we've all been there. Oh my gosh, I got hired. The principal thinks I know what I'm doing. How in the heck am I going to ask that principal who hired me, because she thinks that I know what I'm doing, this question that ought to be obvious? So let's defuse that anxiety and remember, create that 2-on-1 defense. So I've got a trusted colleague I can ask for support on classroom management, on parent communication, on curriculum, and on assessment. One of the things that I like doing is PLC support, not to provide facilitation. That's your job. But I think observing and supporting those meetings, just like cabinet meetings, sometimes can provide a third-party observation that can really help them be more effective throughout the year. And of course, we can implement improved grading systems focused on the latest and best evidence and not the average. Next slide.
All right, as we transition to our final polling activity, a couple of comments that have come in, Doug, to the effect of appreciating the ideas that you've shared and that they will help our students succeed in the fall, and that they are learning quite a bit from you today. So our final polling activity, ladies and gentlemen, if you have already joined, then just grab that phone. If you have not, please pick up the phone and send a text to recipient 22333. Type the message creative lead 764. And our final question, the poll should be active momentarily. What is your greatest hope for the 2020-2021 school year? Please use one word. And yes, recording will be available to you all. If you will check our website within about 36 hours, generally it takes about a day for the recording to process, and then we will have the link up on our website in the resources section. And Doug, looks like the responses are rolling in. Transformation coming in on the question feature, new forms, well-being, learning. And folks, you may respond with multiple entries. Just use one word at a time.
I also want to mention
Learning.
that all of these slides are going to be available as free downloads as well. And the same is true of follow-up questions from me. I want to notice something really interesting. As of this week, we will have gone over 15,000 people in terms of folks that have received in the United States and around the world. We've had participants from Africa, from Asia, from South America, Europe, all around the world. And I've personally worked in more than 40 countries. And yet it's interesting how similar some of these things are. Equity all comes up as number one. And that is why, through perhaps dumb luck, if not scholarship, my newest book, Equity and Excellence, seems to be something that really is in the top of everybody's mind, because it's really important that we define equity in a thoughtful way. Too many people think equity and excellence compete with each other. I'm determined that we can do both at the same time. So a couple of final notes. Number one, here's my personal contact information. You can tweet me directly at Douglas Reeves. You'll always get a personal response. No robots, no admins, that's me. And that's my personal cell phone. For our international guests, please dial country code 1, then 781-710-9633, and you'll always get a personal response. I'm not saying I've got all the answers, but I've seen a thing or two in 50 states and more than 40 countries, so maybe I can offer some ideas for you. And most of all, I want to make sure that if you found today worthwhile and you think it would be useful for your school or district, we're offering these for individual schools, for districts, for regions, for provinces, whatever your needs happen to be. Please let us know, and we'll provide that direct support to you. I know also that I learned from your comments and learned from your questions as well. So from all of my colleagues at Creative Leadership Solutions, thanks so much for your kind attention. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And again, within approximately 36 hours, this recording will be available on our website. Just go to creativeleadership.net and the resources section for recordings. Have a wonderful rest of the week.